Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. It's Wednesday, the 19th of June in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Nvidia overtakes Microsoft and Apple to become the world's most valuable company.
Jim Ratcliffe, the UK's second richest person, tells Bloomberg that Britons have had enough of Sunak's Tories.
Plus, an unintended consequence for low-income families. Our exclusive reporting finds private schools threatening to cut pupil aid over Labour's tax plans.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
The chipmaker Nvidia has unseated Microsoft to become the world's most valuable company with a market cap of more than $3.3 trillion. The firm's stock rose by 3.5% on Tuesday as investors continue to bet on its dominance in AI chip technology. Bloomberg's senior equities reporter Bailey Lipschutz says Nvidia's share price rise this year is unprecedented.
It's added $2.1 trillion in market value this year. That's more than Amazon. That's more than Meta. That's more than Berkshire Hathaway. Really crushing expectations, and it's all about AI and what the future could bring and how Nvidia is going to take us there.
Bailey Lipschutz says Nvidia's rise is another reminder that AI is the top focus of many investors, with the chipmaker's sales up by more than 125% last year. Nvidia's surging stock price has made co-founder and CEO Jensen Huang one of the world's richest people. His net worth has climbed nearly $75 billion since the beginning of the year to $119 billion on the Bloomberg Billionaires Index.
To elections now, a poll of almost 20,000 people by Ipsos suggests that Keir Starmer's Labour Party will win the biggest majority of any post-war UK government. It's the latest survey to suggest Rishi Sunak's Conservatives are on course for a defeat of historic proportions in the general election. Britain's second richest person, Jim Ratcliffe, has told Bloomberg exclusively that the country has had enough of the Tories.
You know, the Conservatives now, they've had a fairly long stint, and they've put forward a whole series of prime ministers that haven't been terribly successful, really, to be honest, the last 4 or so. So, it's, you know, I think the UK, everybody in the UK now, you can see that the mood in the UK, everybody's ready for a change. They've had enough. And I've met Keir Starmer a couple of times. I like Keir. I think he'll do a very sensible job.
The billionaire and Manchester United owner Ratcliffe also added that he wasn't a fan of changes to the non-dom regime. His comments come as the seat-by-seat analysis from Ipsos also predicted that Nigel Farage, the leader of the right-wing Reform UK party, will become an MP for the first time.
France and Italy are among 7 countries that will face official EU warnings over their budget deficits. Bloomberg has learned the European Commission will announce steps against those countries later today. They'll require Paris and Rome to submit plans to Brussels on how they will bring spending under control or face potential fines. The timing of the announcement for France is particularly sensitive, where the parliamentary election campaign is underway.
Well, speaking of France, the National Rally leader Jordan Bardella says that he won't become Prime Minister unless his party wins an absolute majority in the upcoming elections. Bardella told France 2 television that he needs voters' full support.
I want the power to act. I want to act and I want to govern. And to govern, I say to the French people, I need you to choose the alternative. I need you to give me, alongside our Republican allies on the right, a large majority.
Jordan Bardella there speaking through a translator. The last time that France saw its National Assembly and presidency controlled by different parties was in 1997. In that situation, the president typically handles foreign policy and defence, whilst the Prime Minister controls domestic issues, including fiscal policy. According to Bloomberg's poll of polls, the National Rally is expected to win almost 33% of the vote in the first round.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has arrived in North Korea for his first visit there in 24 years. The 2 countries are set to deepen their military cooperation during the trip. Bloomberg's John Herskovitz says that Russia is increasingly competing with China for North Korea's friendship.
It benefits all 3 eventually, in that we'll have a stronger North Korea-Russia tie, along with the already strong North Korea-China ties, and this triangular relationship is all in opposition to the U.S. and its partners. So we're seeing a more balanced triangle, and eventually this could really cause some problems for whatever administration is in Washington.
Herskovitz adds that the US and South Korea both say Kim has already sent millions of artillery shells to Russia for use on the front lines in Ukraine. Moscow and Pyongyang have denied this. Now in a moment we'll bring you more in our exclusive reporting on how private schools in the UK are putting bursaries on the line over Labour's tax plans. But first, just reflect for a moment on the stock rally that brought Nvidia to that place as the world's most valuable company. Our colleagues have been crunching the numbers. Nvidia has returned 591,078% since its IPO in 1999, if you include reinvested dividends. Six very big figures.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that number, not me, because it's really quite tricky. It is so long. I mean, there has been an absolute wild ride, though, for Nvidia's shares. It's not been smooth at all in terms of long-term investors. There have been 3 annual collapses, remember, in Nvidia's shares, i.e. collapsing at least 50%. So you would have had to be very patient, but the return, enormous.
I mean, look, there's a great series of charts in this article by our colleagues Joanne Wittenstein and Carmen Rennick as well, and definitely worth checking out to take a look at how the rise of Nvidia has brought it to that title. Of course, questions too over how Nvidia sustains itself from here, but in the end it was that 3.5% rise in the share price that pushed Nvidia to the milestone, surpassing Microsoft and Apple to become the world's most valuable firm. Let's get more now from our tech editor Vlad Savov on the rise and the path ahead for Nvidia. Vlad, great to have you with us. So, I mean, this is an AI rally, but what's pushed Nvidia's share prices higher in most recent weeks?
Well, as you say, it is AI, it is enthusiasm, especially in the US stock market. And when you look toward AI, those top 3 companies are the titular embodiments of it, really. Nvidia is the one that provides the shovels, as people like to say, when you're digging for gold. Microsoft is the one who's most aggressively doing it with its investment in OpenAI and putting AI into Windows. And now Apple, its most recent share price surge was built on the same thing, on confidence about how it's going to integrate what it calls Apple Intelligence into the iPhone and its ecosystem of devices. So yes, the answer is as simple as AI is driving all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it means Nvidia's current market cap, $3.34 trillion. It's a staggering number. Jensen Huang, in just one day, adding $3.9 billion. But of course, there could well be challenges ahead. I mean, the company has managed to deliver kind of quarter after quarter. We watched that very closely over the last year. What do you think the challenge is, though, that the company is going to face just in maintaining this kind of momentum?
Well, Jensen was here in Asia. He visited Taiwan for the Computex trade show. And it's worth noting, he was the only major tech CEO from the US who graced Computex last year. This year, everyone saw the success of Nvidia over the past year, and they said, you know what, we should do the same thing. So the likes of AMD, Intel for the first time brought its CEO out to Computex in Taiwan. And the reason is all of the chips, all of the infrastructure that goes into these data centers, it has its epicenter in Taiwan. It's where TSMC makes Nvidia's critical AI accelerator chips. And the big challenge for Nvidia, in fact, me talking to people around Computex, is the fact that if Nvidia could make twice as many chips, it would sell twice as many chips. It's supply constraints right now. And those are not going to go away over the next year, maybe even longer.
What about the competition, Vlad? Does Nvidia really have any competitors in this space?
Well, returning to Computex again, AMD came out, CEO Lisa Su said that AMD is not only competitive on the technology front, but it's better because it has an open approach where NVIDIA wants to sell you everything in the same way that Apple gives you proprietary everything and doesn't want to include anybody else. That's the way NVIDIA is approaching the business. AMD wants to be the Android or the Google to Apple. And there was plenty of positive reception for that in Taiwan. One of the luminaries, Johnny Shi, the chairman of ASUS, called Lisa Su the favorite child of Taiwan, which might have hurt Jensen Huang's feelings. Intel also would say that it has faster accelerators and better value. They all made their case. They all pitched their products. We'll see if the biggest customers are going to buy in, because a big part of NVIDIA's revenue comes from those biggest US companies, Meta, Google, Amazon, who are making the multi-billion-dollar investments.
Yeah, okay, so that's interesting. What do you think the reasoning is then for investors about how high NVIDIA's market cap could go then in terms of the future path?
I'm not really sure. I mean, one thing that's really worth bearing in mind is, as recently as 5 years ago, Nvidia was a company that made gaming graphics cards, which accidentally fell into being used by the crypto industry. That was kind of the first trial balloon for what happened with AI and how the graphics technology showed itself really capable in doing different tasks than just gaming. And when it comes to the scale of it, most recently, Nvidia reported $2-something billion in gaming revenue and then $20-something billion in data center revenue. How fast that revenue grows and how far that revenue grows is probably going to determine the share price. It just seems to make sense.
Okay, I mean, when it comes to gaming, looks like Nvidia won, at least for now. Anyway, Vlad Savov, our tech editor, thank you very much for joining us on that news that Nvidia has taken the crown as the world's most valuable company.
Well, next, let's go to the UK election campaign and a key Labour Party policy to change VAT on private school fees for the first time. Bloomberg has learnt that some private schools are warning that financial support for low-income students could be at risk if the plans are implemented. Our reporter, Tiwa Adebayo, has been delving into this story and she joins us now. Good morning, Tiwa. Firstly, just remind us of the Labour Party proposal exactly and also why it's come about.
So Labour are proposing to add a 20% VAT levy onto private school fees. It's actually crucial to understand exactly what they mean by this. They're not seeing it as a new tax, but in their language, it's removing an existing tax break from parents that send their children to private school who don't currently have to pay VAT on those fees. And for Labour, what this is all about really is kind of levelling the playing field between the state and private sectors when it comes to education. So they're hoping that this new change could raise about 1.6 billion in government funding. And that's a statistic that's also been backed by the Institute for Fiscal Studies. And using that money, they hope to funnel more funding back into the state education sector. They're looking to recruit 6,500 more teachers. They want to improve mental health support for children in schools. So it's really all about bolstering that funding into the state sector.
This is something, though, that there has been some criticism of this proposal. Private schools and parents of children who go to them aren't happy about it. What have they been saying about this idea?
Yeah, well, it's certainly one of Labour's more polarising policies. It's actually worth mentioning that it's not new. The party have been talking about this since at least the days of Jeremy Corbyn and definitely before as well. But part of the reason, I think, for such a strong reaction is that this VAT levy would be unprecedented and it actually would set the UK apart in a global context in terms of having a consumer tax on education. And also when you think of sort of the wider educational context of the UK, the independent school sector is used to being left alone historically. The last government legislation regarding the management of independent schools, I think, was in the 1800s. So it's been well over 100 years now of these schools having true independence in name and nature. There is also one side of the argument, of course, that says we're talking about a very small proportion of the country here. So just 7% of students in the UK are privately educated, and this change could stand to raise a lot of well-needed funds for the state sector. But there has been backlash from parents. There's a lobby group called Education Not Taxation. They've started a petition in protest of this move that has more than 100,000 signatures. And in terms of the representative bodies in the sector, I spoke to the Independent Schools Council, which represents about 1,400 private schools in the country, and they say they're not actually sure how robust the sector is and whether they could deal with this sort of shock. They think some schools might have to close. So that just gives you a sense of the anxiety that many are feeling within the sector.
Yeah, OK, interesting. Then also the issue around bursary programmes being at risk.
So the head teachers that I spoke to for this story are exploring a number of cost-cutting alternatives. They don't want to pass on that full 20% increase to their parents because of anxieties about parents leaving the sector. So they are looking at other ways to absorb some of that cost. And something that kept coming up is bursaries. So at the moment, the Independent Schools Council says about 1/3 of all students in private schools receive some sort of fee assistance. So that's £560,000 1,000 pupils. And on average, they're getting about £13,000 a year, which is 3/4 of the average private school fees. It's a big proportion of the cost. And apparently schools are having to make difficult choices about whether to continue with that sort of fee assistance. And there is anxiety about whether those children will be able to remain in these independent schools without that assistance.
Okay, so that's a key element of your reporting on this story. Tiwa, talk to us about the big picture. How could the policy change affect the wider educational landscape in the UK?
So the central argument here on behalf of a lot of the independent sector is that there will be a sort of mass exodus, as the CEO of the Independent Schools Council, Julie Robinson, described to me. There'll be this huge exit of students from the independent sector into the state sector, which could end up overwhelming the state sector. For what it's worth, the Institute for Fiscal Studies don't agree with this point, and they think that even after accommodating those extra children in the state sector, there would still be an extra 1.3 to 1.5 billion left for the government to spend and funnel back into funding classrooms and funding more programs for children in the state sector. So that's the real story there, the real anxiety on some people's behalf. But the head teachers that I spoke to, a lot of them said that this policy could end up making the independent sector more elitist as well.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.